Continuing to read Dallas Pimiento, Book 3, Bronchodilator. I'm going to start off with a piece called He of the Sparkling Shoes. The lines are evenly spaced, Nodrell the Elf Lord noted. That's good. The noble elf's talents went beyond mere aristocratic swagger and the proper oversight of his subterranean manor house. He was also a fair draftsman when called upon to act in such a capacity. His judgment of the lines, however, no matter how expert, meant little to Ted Gomez. Of course, he didn't reveal this attitude to Nodrell. He wanted the Elf Lord to look benignly on him. Thank you. Gomez held the plans for the monolith before the tiny Nodrell. His own head was stooped to avoid striking the ceiling of the ballroom where this reception was being held. You can put them away now, Nodrell called out. Yes, of course. Gomez began rolling the blueprints back up, once more revealing his host to his sight. I think, however, Nodrell sucked on a piece of pear in his gloved hand, that what this monolith needs is an expression of the chaotic mind. Indeed, your lordship, I had originally envisioned such a thing, but I did not think that the public— Oh, the public, frowned he of the sparkling shoes. They make me sick with their hide-bound sensibilities. Nodrell shook his head savagely and flung his uneaten treat into a porcelain urn. Have some moulava, Mr. Gomez. Well, how did it go? Gomez's portly partner, Alan Finn, asked the former, joined him by the 1/10th scale model of the HMS Bruce Willis. I think I have him interested. Gomez rubbed his chin as he answered. I think I can convince him that there is a kindred vision in my eyes. When the monolith was constructed, however, Nodrell's builders relied heavily on the vague notions of the Elf Lord himself. Paying a bitter, much-delayed visit to the monolith one Independence Day, Gomez and Finn disgustedly compared the thing before them to a whale's penis thrusting up from the ground, as conceived and executed by a blind sculptress from some planet where males are unknown. I hope he's resting uneasily inside that monstrosity. Gomez thrust his old hands deeper into the pockets of his coat against the unnatural chill. Cagey Atlantean. Once, Doug Florentine had reinvented himself as a power drink. Charges that he was blaspheming the Lord's Supper in the ensuing marketing campaign were dismissed by Baconomics, the manufacturer of Doug Florentine the drink. Chairman Wilt Lungfowl in an emotional press conference. I don't care what he says. One pillowcase, one of those protesting outside Baconomics headquarters, was quoted as saying, to have this ex-rock star ask people to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood is nothing but an affront to the Lord. I wish to let the Lord speak for himself. Doug Florentine put down his tumbler of whiskey and, leaning on his palms, looked out over the city. Well, that's clearly impossible, Lungfowl's right-hand man, Nabo, growled. He spun the oaken Lazy Susan before him. Various Baconomics products moved one by one before his eyes. We never had this kind of problem with the Jesus Christ weight loss gum. Lungfowl polished his glasses with a bit of rag as he spoke. We didn't have a rock star endorsing that product, Nabo noted. We didn't have a rock star as the product, Lungfowl added. His humor was bitter. No one laughed. But that's my point. Florentine turned from the window. Or one of my points. I'm not a rock star. I'm an actor who's had a couple of hit singles. Perhaps the cognoscenti know that, Lungfowl said, but I'm afraid that's not how the average consumer sees you. Maybe that's it, Nabo set forward. What is? His image. We change his image with the average consumer. And how do we do that? Florentine asked. He downed the remainder of his whiskey. 2 days later, Florentine announced the foundation of his personal monastic order, with himself as the head monk. He appeared in a velvet robe and sported a short fake beard. Those who wish to retreat from the world have only to send in 20 proofs of purchase. He touched his fingertips together and intoned. No grievable chorus. I find it odd that the centipedes, in their seemingly endless conflict with the Sincarians, have not hit upon the idea of taking advantage of my advertised services as psychic, drummer, and bean counter. For those of you who saw the original ad in the back pages of Dubuque Franchisee know that I have since removed the reference to my work as a pastry chef. It seems there are insurmountable licensing problems on some of the Punk Liquor Islands where, if you read Dubuque Franchisee with any regularity or thoroughness, you must know the centipedes have established a military colony. Even if my price is too high for them, I have put the word out that I would be willing to work in exchange for lessons in classical centipede calligraphy. You would think that such a bargain would be immediately snapped up, but no. With next month's issue, my ad will lapse, having attracted no takers. I can't afford to continue to advertise in Dubuque Franchisee. I can't even afford to continue buying it, though it is a most diverting magazine. Alone among human and semi-human publications, it is favored with the custom of the centipede military establishment. Until my funds completely run out, or my whim to visit the Punk Liquor Islands ends, I guess I'll have to maintain my acquaintanceships with the university liaisons who have the ears of so many of the centipede general staff. Only the other day, to show you the difficulties I face, a friend of mine from the sanitation department here in Fungroid Minor stopped by my quarters and marveled at their tiny size. "I thought you were moving back to the country," he let me know. "What? Why would I do that? I've got everything I need right here." I gestured with my burrito towards the Herbie Hancock poster, the ornamental cactus, the new unplayable Peter Murphy CD. "But you talked with such sentimentality of the hot summer days spent shelling peas and shucking corn under the pine trees in the backyard of your grandmother's house, sitting on a homemade stool with a glass of iced tea on the ground beside you." "Anakin, I think you're confusing sentimentality with sentiment." Written specifically for conquest. I was compelled to speak with far less eloquence and verbal dexterity than usual. Remember, the show's producer had said, "You're going to be seen by millions of people, most of whom not only don't know the proper usage of the word whom, but are also suspicious and contemptuous of anyone who does." She offered me a cup of coffee, but I declined, citing health concerns. When my image appeared on the black and white set in the Goobersons' living room, instant recognition overshadowed anything that I had to say. "Hey, Burl, isn't that the guy that tried to steal your kayak?" Rick pondered, pointing at the screen. "Yeah, I think it is." As a paroxysm of angry memories flooded his mnemonic horn, the rhinoceros man was thrown about in his easy chair, dropping his beer and tossing his head from side to side, so that the small living room's wallpaper, patterned in furtive lions, winking suns, and stylized roosters, seemed to flow together until a bizarre, psychedelic jungle enveloped Burl on all sides. He paddled his kayak down the muddy river of my voice running through the center of it all. "And so in conclusion," I enunciated the word clearly and slowly, "let me repeat. Starting tomorrow, a free copy of Inter-Universal Communications will be delivered to every household willing to display the bronze bacillus of procurement in its front window. Thank you, and good night." I smiled unnaturally until the green light on the camera changed to red. "You didn't say God bless," the producer admonished me as I was led away from the set. "I don't say God bless," I informed her. "Ever." "Huh." The woman exhaled. She looked at one of the headphone-adorned flunkies on the other side. "He doesn't drink coffee. He doesn't say God bless. And yet he wants to be a media star. Achoo!" She pretended to sneeze. "I'm sorry," I said as I loosened my tie. "Didn't she advise you against the bow tie?" the director later demanded of me, just as a couple of men with leathery hides burst into the room. Anguished banquet. "There will be no frozen yogurt, I'm afraid," Otosh Burke announced in a low voice to his immediate table mates as he lowered himself back into his seat. Although a couple of pairs of eyes moved to him as Burke sat and delivered his news, no one indicated by word or sign that he had heard what the corpulent man had said. The eyes that had followed Burke's return to his seat had already fixed themselves on other interlocutors when Burke added, "There was a fight in the kitchen, and the bucket containing the frozen yogurt fell on the floor." He elucidated to no one. "The yogurt got dirty." Burke looked about at the ladies and gentlemen whom he knew to be within hearing of him. Perhaps they didn't care that there would be no frozen yogurt. Perhaps they hadn't heard him. A voice countered in Burke's head. Surely they would be as disturbed as he had been to discover the loss of the tasty dessert. He was just about to repeat his news, this time having made certain to get someone's attention first, perhaps by tugging on his or her sleeve, when old Gamelson, down at the end of the table on the left, rose and began making an announcement. "What is he saying?" a lady in yellow across the table from Burke asked. "Perhaps they have saved some of the frozen yogurt after all," Burke supposed enthusiastically. Tom Cutney, thumping one of his heavily waxed mustachios, snapped a fierce, outraged look at Burke from his seat next to the lady in yellow. As Gamelson continued to orate in an inaudible mumble far away, Burke noted a trolley being wheeled in from the kitchen. "Frozen yogurt at last," he thought excitedly. He glanced at Cutney, but kept his mouth shut. He picked up a spoon from the untouched array beside his plate. As more and more heads turned towards the approaching trolley, Burke heard one woman say aloud, "Oh, it's cake! How nice!" "Yes," replied Cutney. "It's old Gamelson's birthday. Didn't you know?" At this exchange, Burke tossed his spoon back onto the table with a clatter that brought another admonitory glare from Cutney and a violent confrontation after the meal. "What the font you pick says about you." No less than 15 of the short pieces collected in Brant Borden's first book, The Cat Globe, started with the words, "Time was," more. 3 of these started, "Time was when a man." Borden faced no criticism for this repetition. In fact, the handful of people who actually read the book made no note of it at all. Of course, none of them were in any way close to being professional reviewers of books or anything else. They were merely patrons of the Nethermore coffee shop, where Borden had casually left a copy of his book among the pile of reading material made available to the customers. On one of the days he was free to waste, Borden went to the shop and sat against the wall, watching the spot across the room where he knew his book to be. He sat doodling on a pad and letting a cup of coffee go cold. After an hour he was nearly ready to leave and perform some espionage duties when 2 older gentlemen sat down at the table adjacent to the stack of literature with their drinks. One of them took up Borden's book. "I say, The Cat Globe," Governor Sweet laughed to his companion Lornell Duress. "Sounds intriguing." He opened it. As he did, Duress sipped his black infusion and commented on the cover. "Illustrated by the author, apparently." Oh, he was dry. Sweet flashed his friend a look. "Is self-published, Lornell. What do you expect?" he said. Duress was actually formulating a reply, but before he could get the beginning of it out, Sweet had begun to read aloud. "Listen to this," he said. "Time was when a man could ride his mule through the bean orchards of Her Majesty without suffering the indignity of having his hat knocked from his head by ill-maintained low-hanging branches. Although it was my job to maintain those branches, it amused me so to watch from my tiny hut the mule-riding gentlemen have their hats knocked off that I must confess to shirking my duty. Oh, Lornell, I must have this book." "I suppose you can purchase it at the counter," Duress suppressed a yawn. Borden was indeed ambivalent at seeing the proceeds of the sale go to the coffee shop. Gettysburg Light. Her zippered mouth, inspiring disgust among the clothes spinners, yet issued words of comfort that many took to heart that day. Dan, as disgusted as any of his contemporaries, walked back to his vintage arts and crafts bungalow, stunned at the glow of confidence warming him from within. "Martha," he called when he had stepped inside the front door. As he stood poised to receive his wife's answering voice, his gaze was arrested by the stuffed head of the bear his father had shot long ago. "Yes," he nodded slowly. "I'm going to burn you this very day. No longer will I tolerate your malignant presence." "Dan," Martha interrupted her husband's mental declaration. "I'm home, Martha. Where are you?" "I'm in the kitchen, Dan. Come in here." Dan did as he was bidden, and found his wife standing over the work table, her arms elbow-deep in a large metal pot full of gray slop. "Martha, something wonderful has happened. Let me tell—" "Sorry, I can't touch you," Martha interrupted. "I'm covered in this stuff." "That's okay. Martha, let me tell you, something wonderful has happened." "Where have you been?" She looked him up and down as her fingers worked at the thick gray substance. "Down at the square. That zipper-mouth woman was down there." "Haven't they run her out of town by now?" Martha scowled. "She makes me sick. She makes me sick, too. But, Martha, what is that?" Dan pointed at the pot. "It's the rest of that bear meat we had in the freezer. I've boiled it down to its essential paste." Dan stared, dumbfounded, for a few seconds before remembering his intended statement. "Darling, something that woman said has made me determined to change my life. I'm going to write that book I planned." "That's wonderful, Dan, but what could that woman have said?" This time Dan interrupted her. "It doesn't matter, Martha. What matters is that I'm starting afresh, and I'm burning that old bear's head of my father's." "Dan, the whole living room is decorated around that bear's head," Martha answered with determination. The bankable smell of restricted carbon. Although never as popular as the more general-purpose models, the Lincoln-eared peasant remora garnered a devoted fan base among the specialists dedicated to the bean insertion phase of the whole operation. "The whole operation," sneered Chancellor Shanty. "You make it sound so generic, so palatable. Why don't you admit the truth of the ministry's aims, the remaking of the whole world?" I was under no obligation to answer Shanty. By breaking the protocols of good literature, he had put himself in the wrong. Still, my pride demanded a response be made. "You mean the whole universe, Chancellor? Your paltry global conceptions." The ringing of the old-fashioned telephone device interrupted my haughty rebuttal. "Excuse me." Shanty held up a hand, yet leathery from a youth spent in the lumber yards of Factus Mono. He picked up the receiver. "Chancellor's office, this is Shanty." He listened for a moment to the tinny, squawking voice coming through the line. With my secret eavesdropping gadget, I was able to pick up the carnival-like sounds of a heavily commercialized beach in the background of the caller. Were they nothing but a recording designed to deceive the Chancellor? Was this unknown person with the Brazilian accent actually sitting in some office somewhere, an office as equally stuffy as the Chancellor's own? It was none of my business, I decided, putting the secret gadget back into its convenient carrying case and turning my attention back to the framed arrangements of Brazilian nut wings that covered the wall behind me, just as Shanty replied, "I don't think so, my friend, although I must admit the whole operation bears watching." After a kind and solicitous farewell, Shanty hung up the receiver in its two-pronged hanging place and turned back to me. As he seemed to have lost as to how to begin, I had no real desire to know any such thing. "No," he said, "I'm all right, of course, but it's these Lincoln-eared peasant remores. It seems they've been superseded by a new and flashier model." Blueberry buckle. The old cracker chewed on the ends of his fingernails, but did not actually bite into them. He merely worked his saliva-covered teeth under the nails, then put his fingertips to his nose and enjoyed the resultant cheese-like smell. Being a forgotten member of the underclass, he had no way of knowing that he should have been on guard against publicly succumbing to his old habit of his. As he sat in the dirt with his back to the heavily vandalized wall of the library, chewing and sniffing, he was being filmed. A day later, as the edited footage of his orgy of self-perception made its way through the entertainment terminals of the world, debate began to rage over whether the short film was meant as humor or as social commentary. In essence, is the filmmaker poking fun at this wretched ignoramus, or is he inviting us to pity his plight? Dr. Nazine discussed the matter with his dinner guests. "Or both," Clarence Fishlong hiccuped. "Clarence," admonished his wife, "that's silly. It's got to be either or. Right, Dr. Nazine?" "Oh, I think so," Nazine replied as he jiggled a handful of salted nuts. "Or the filmmaker could just be astonishingly inept." "Shocking," Rupert Handstand sounded, "truly shocked." Yes, it's hard to believe that such ignorance of technology and creative form exists these days, but it does. Everyone at the table turned to the camera, filming them, and smiled. "Laziness," Bob Took Shower declared. "That's what it is." "It brings up a good question, though," Deborah Fishlong mused. "If the filmmaker is technologically ignorant, how much more ignorant is the subject of this confusing film?" Dr. Nazine and Bob glanced at each other uneasily. "That's why I come down on the side of moral ambivalence," Clarence declared forcefully. His declaration will be a perfect ending for the film, should the filmmaker decide to use it. Conference room in spring. "How lovely 2 or more shades of green look adjacent to one another," thought Ramona Applituba. I was watching her, she said this. The room was empty except for a long table, crudely built and painted white, that ran down the length of one wall, and the handful of characters aside from myself. These others were all ladies in simple cotton or linen dresses. Ramona Applituba was one of them. They were all gathered on the far side of the room from me. I sat on a small folding stool, intermittently watching them and doodling in a graph paper notebook. Eventually, one of them approached me. "Excuse me," she said to get my attention. After I had looked up somewhat blankly, she asked, "Are you drawing us?" Her smile was friendly. "Take a look." I held the notebook up. The drawings were of a singularly horrific and abstracted nature, yet depicting a monotonous vision of a world populated almost entirely by ugly men. After apologizing, the woman, whose name I believe was Tosi Prawnvender, asked me if I knew what we were waiting for. I hesitated, glancing at the other women, hesitating just long enough for the door behind me and to the right to open and answer her question for me. Still, I added redundantly, "Perhaps for this, I think." "Ladies!" boomed the immense head that had entered the room on spider-like ambulatory pinions, hemmed in to either side of its cheeks by high, armless shoulders that hunched and bunched and preceded it first by one and then the other. "I am indeed pleased that you could all make it." The head, called Foster by his intimates, of which I was not counted, I assure you, turned to me and asked, "Are they all here?" His voice was like that of an elephant, nervous and hungry. "All except that Deborah Fishlong woman. Apparently her mail service has been—" "It matters not," the head roared, turning back to face the terrified group of women. "These should prove more than adequate. You may go, Senor Andante." I had some trouble folding my stool up. Only a few doors down, Ned Feast started a Senor Andante fan club. His mysterious appearances and puzzling adventures fascinate me, he explained to Dorothy Pajam. As she sat regarding him with her own patented mixture of curiosity and disgust, Feast busied himself hanging up the Senor Andante poster he had ordered from overseas at great cost. "He hasn't even noticed what I'm wearing," she thought, crossing her long, meaty legs like a pair of self-conscious scissors. "You're the first to arrive," Feast continued to talk, oblivious as to whether anyone was listening or not. "But judging by the responses I received from the mass mailing I sent out, you shouldn't be the only one." "May I have some punch, please?" Dorothy asked in a voice like some primordial ocean god talking through helium. "You certainly speak properly," Feast observed as he ladled a measure of the green drink into a plastic cup. "Almost everyone I know would have said, 'Can I have some punch?'" "I attended a finishing school," Dorothy at last captured Feast's direct gaze with her own perfectly formed eyes. "Just for girls." Her fingers touched his briefly as he passed her the cup of punch. "What's your favorite Senor Andante story?" Feast asked, wondering if he was about to sneeze. "I don't know that I have one." Dorothy kept her eyes on the president of the fan club as she sipped, her not overly painted mouth turned down in a sour frown at the taste of the punch just as the door opened. "Ned!" Jasper Tungearl howled along with a half-dozen other men, entering the room in a silly, merry group. "Jasper!" Feast returned the greeting. "You came. Welcome to the inaugural meeting of the Senor Andante fan club." He saluted each newcomer by name until he came to the last man to enter the room. This last man he was one he knew, but yet did not know. His eyes grew large. "We brought a friend," Jasper informed him with a broad grin. Dorothy took the opportunity to drop her cup into the trash can. She had already guessed at the identity of the man in the conical hat.